There we go. Okay, so we are going through the way of the Bodhisattva by the great Indian master Shantideva. Who, after all these years since his book, since his teachings were put down, since he gave these teachings, all those years, they somehow still are relevant. This text, just to update us, this text was Shantideva's compilation of his understanding, or his compilation of the certain relevant teachings from all of the sutras. He was a great master of all the sutras, and having realized the meaning of these sutras, then he put into these 10 chapters the relevant aspects of the path to Buddhahood. And of course, this is particularly the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha when he turned the wheel of the Mahayana path, the great path. So up to now, so far, we've gone over the chapter beginning. The text begins with the first chapter on reflecting on the benefits and of bodhicitta, and what it really comes down to is reflecting on how we should cultivate bodhicitta, because for centuries, maybe for many eons, great beings, great enlightened beings have all agreed that all of we beings who have a mind, that the best mind to cultivate, the most noble mind to cultivate, is the mind of bodhicitta. And so in setting out this statement, this view, then Shantideva goes on in the second and third chapters to outline the manner in which one gives rise to this bodhicitta in both the aspiration aspect and the engaging or the conduct aspect of bodhicitta. And then following that, in the fourth, fifth, and sixth chapters, he takes into consideration that we are our bodhicitta that we give rise to, which is really just the pledge, the vow to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. and both to aspire towards that result and to engage in the causes that give rise to that result. And just repeating the prayers and vows of bodhicitta and gaining some initial familiarity what bodhicitta in a relative sense means, then we who have undertaken that path are very, that bodhicitta is very sensitive, it's very fragile. And so in order to train our mind in maintaining that bodhicitta, the integrity of our mind, of bodhicitta, then the teachings commence with the practice of carefulness, mindfulness, and introspection. These are the two chapters, the fourth and fifth chapters, that begin to introduce us to how we should protect our bodhicitta. So this is, for beginners like us, this is a very important teaching, kind of a key teaching. Just repeating and giving rise to this some noble aspiration. We need to understand that we are very careless with our mind. We allow our mind to indulge in all sorts of thoughts and emotions that distance us from that initial impulse to develop bodhicitta. And so learning the teachings of carefulness in the second chapter is a key point. And then in the fourth chapter, that is, and in the fifth chapter, the teachings of mindfulness and introspection are laid out in a very clear way. And so these three teachings are the antidote, or these three practices are the antidote to forgetfulness and carelessness and a lack of awareness. Then the sixth chapter is the chapter on patience, which is, again, now we're aligning these teachings along with the 6 paramitas, the 6 transcendent modes of conduct of a bodhisattva. And carefulness, mindfulness, and introspection fall under the category of the bodhisattva practice of discipline. And then the chapter on patience, which has to do with antidoting the greatest threat to our bodhicitta, which is anger. So these 3 chapters, the 4th, 5th, and 6th chapters, are ones that, as we reflect, contemplate, and apply those teachings to our everyday experience, will prevent the degradation or the forgetting our bodhicitta, will not corrupt our bodhicitta with our kleshas. what I am going to begin with next here is chapter 10, the chapter on dedication. Since this is something we as practitioners practice regularly, if we have a formal practice, then we do dedicate the merit of that practice, and then in the evening, if we reflect on our day and bring to mind all those highlights of our virtuous actions, then we dedicate that. So I thought we would delve a little bit more into this 10th chapter of dedication. And again, the teachings that I've been relying on are the teachings of Khenpo Kunpao, who was a disciple of Palta Rinpoche. And Palta Rinpoche taught this hundreds of times, and many of his disciples taught it also hundreds of times. And often it's mentioned that Palta Rinpoche taught, especially when he was teaching to large groups of the how do I say, just the regular people. He taught the first 3 chapters and then the 10th chapter, and that would be a complete teaching. And for those who were more Dharma practitioners, then he would, of course, then go through the entire text bit by bit, sometimes 1 or 2 or 10 verses, and then people would go off and meditate and on those, and then reassemble for the next few verses. So, in keeping with that style, that tradition, then we'll do this 10th chapter of dedication. I say that to just not that you think that I'm just making things up here, jumping around. Dedication usually is performed, or I say practiced, let's say practiced, in conjunction with aspiration. So sometimes in formal practice, at the end of it, it said then recite prayers of dedication and aspiration. Dedication is particular. The distinction between dedication and aspiration is that when we pledge or we transfer or pledge our positive actions to perfect enlightenment for the sake of all beings, then that is dedication. Aspirations, on the other hand, are aspirational prayers are a wish that all beings themselves attain enlightenment. Aspirations are not associated, or they're not connected with positive actions or wishes. We could say aspiration is a wish. The importance of dedicating, of course, the Buddha taught many sutras on how important it is to dedicate virtue to the enlightenment of all sentient beings. At least that's the Mahayana form of dedicating. If we don't dedicate virtue, it said that virtue can very easily come to nothing. It's as we heard in the 6th chapter on patience, that all the virtue gathered through eons is destroyed in a single instant. That is to say, its fruition will be incinerated. It will be incinerated. It won't. The goodness of that deed will not mature. We discussed that earlier, and that particularly refers to what might be called contaminated virtue. Uncontaminated virtue is virtue that's dedicated to enlightenment, so that virtue then is not used up. It's not spent until enlightenment. Just like a drop, you put one drop of water in the ocean, and because that drop of water merges with that ocean, until that ocean completely evaporates, then that drop is still part of the ocean. And so that virtue is still in our mind stream until enlightenment, if it's dedicated towards that goal. It's also so then, of course, that is to say then how significant and vital it is to practice dedicating. There's several ways that our virtue can be ruined. One is to not dedicate it. Even if it's a small act of kindness, we should always dedicate it to enlightenment, of course, and then fulfilling the Mahayana vision is we dedicate it to the enlightenment of all sentient beings, oneself and all sentient beings. Another way that virtue is ruined, if you dedicate it and that dedication is going to pervert it in some way. Another way that dedicating or that virtue can be ruined is by bragging about your virtue to others. And of course, another way that virtue is ruined is by regretting a virtuous action. Just like we learned in the in the second chapter under confession, but regret. In that case, regret ruins negative actions, unvirtuous actions are ruined. They're incinerated by the power and strength of regret. So here we're talking about virtue. That's why we're advised to not go overboard, not exceed our capacity in our virtuous effort, because we very well may be susceptible to regret, and then it it can harm the fruition of that virtue. Purely uncontaminated virtue is the result of dedicating virtue with unstained wisdom. That is to say, dedicating it with the purity of the three spheres in mind, which is to say the purity of the three spheres. I'm sure you probably know this, but we need to always remind ourselves that the three spheres have to do with, or the purity of the three spheres means that oneself, as the one who is dedicating, is unstained by self, by belief in a self. And the virtue as the object, or the virtue as that which is dedicated, is also lacks true, real existence. And also the objects, all sentient beings in this case, lack real existence. Yet all clearly appears. We appear as the dedicator, the virtue is recalled as what is to be dedicated, and all sentient beings within however we can conceive of the scope of all sentient beings are appearing, yet lack true inherent essential existence. So dedicating virtue in that way is called pure dedication, or uncontaminated by the stains of the three spheres. A key point in this regard is, if, or I should say, since we may be unable to dedicate in that very dedicate from that wisdom point of view, then it's taught how, if we dedicate our virtue with the attitude that just like all the bodhisattvas dedicate virtue, then that's how I dedicate. I dedicate my virtue just in that same way. And this very well may be a familiar recitation that we may know. And so this manner of dedicating like the bodhisattvas, who truly know how to dedicate free of contamination by the three spheres. And this is this is said to be like uncontaminated virtue. So this is important. This is taught as an important key point. We shouldn't feel as though we need to wait until we attain some profound and vast realization of the wisdom nature. But this is how we can still dedicate virtue so that it does not decline. Another point about virtue, these are just sort of various points about dedicating. When we dedicate, we should be aware of the virtue that we're dedicating and dedicate it consciously, and be aware of the object of our dedication. There's one account of one town, Vaishali, in the town of Vaishali, where the Buddha stayed often. All the rich patrons of that area invited the Buddha and his disciples to a feast, a grand luncheon, and the Buddha accepted. And then before the feast, pretas, a group of pretas, suffering pretas, appeared before the Buddha and requested the Buddha to dedicate the merit of the offering of the feast to them, with the expectation that they would benefit from that, with that merit that would be dedicated. And these pretas, these tormented spirits, took that form because of their avariciousness, because of in a previous life they were very avaricious. Also, they were the parents. They were the parents of the patrons. That was the connection there. And then, given all of those aspects, then they requested the Buddha to dedicate the merit. And the Buddha said, I'll dedicate the merit to you for your benefit, but you have to be there. You have to appear. And they said, we can't possibly appear. They were in a very the form of their form that they took was very horrific, and they were ashamed. They said, "Oh, we're too ashamed of the way we look that we won't appear there. Please." And the Buddha said, "How is it that you're ashamed of the result of your actions, but you weren't ashamed when you engaged in the cause of that action. And I won't dedicate the merit unless you actually come. And so they agreed to come. And then when at the feast, when these tormented spirits appeared, and the people, the, all the guests were horrified, and the Buddha calmed everyone down and explained to them who these pretas were, why they appear as they do, why they're suffering as they do, why they're suffering as they are suffering, and ask them if they would, what did it say? I guess you can ask them if it would be all right if the Buddha dedicated the merit to these pretas, these hungry ghosts, these tormented spirits. They were your parents in a previous life. And so the patrons agreed to that, and the Buddha then dedicated the merit to them. And so this was explained as a advice on how we should dedicate merit with full awareness of the actions involved. Okay, you think about how that's so. Some Longchenpa mentions how some people think that after you do a virtuous act, you should just rest in emptiness, and that's the ultimate dedication. But he does say that the threat of that mode of dedicating is that that there is a tendency to, when we only seal our practice with emptiness, to fall into the extreme of nihilism. But that we should dedicate it with this awareness of who's dedicating, what the virtue actually is that we're dedicating, and to whom we're dedicating. And if it's carried out within however we can approach, or however we can appreciate the purity of the three spheres, then then our dedication is the power of our dedication and the purity of our dedication is commensurate with that. It's also a mistake to have others dedicate merit, just as another point, not to do it yourself. Even sometimes we sponsor things to be done, candles lit, or pujas that we're not able to perform that are maybe particularly beneficial in certain circumstances, and we sponsor those. But then we also need to dedicate the merit of those, not just sort of end our connection with it once we've made a request for some practice or something. We also need to dedicate our merit. also, the when we dedicate the merit, especially when we say read this dedication, because this is very, it's a sometimes it's we'll find that it's kind of tough going. There's certain assumptions that are made uh, in our, and of course we should aspire to this, but the assumptions generally in the way that our traditional Dharma comes across is that we are quite used to past and future lives, not used to past and future lives. We're used to believing in past lives, present lives, and future lives, just like we believe, like just as if we believe in yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I'm not sure, maybe some of us have always thought that way and it's not a big stretch, and some of us still really don't come around, have a hard time coming around to that. But that is something that, of course, if you study certain subjects in Buddhism about how knowledge is acquired, then there's many logical proofs for the existence of past lives and the expectation of future lives, barring enlightenment. And so a lot of the treatment here in the dedication is I think the assumption is that there's past and future lives, uh, and karma, and we should refine always. Of course, I'm sure you've heard this uh, endless times. We need to always refine our understanding of causation and how it is that things occur, and through that understanding, we develop what's called confident faith. Uh, it's questionable if we don't believe in a future life, then why all of this meditation and practice and everything seems like a bother. You know? It's a lot of work for nothing. Just especially if you happen to be what then the alternative would be you'd be lucky. And since you can't, so why not just do whatever you want? So if you have resistance to that idea of why not just do whatever, I'll just do whatever I want. What's the difference? If there's no past, if there's no future life, then I'll just do what I want. Uh, if you if you don't like that notion, then you probably believe in karma and past and future lives. And so that'll give you a foothold, a finger hold. It's important to continue appreciating this point. It's always taught in dedication. Uh, what I was uh, getting at was that uh, dedication should be, and I think Shantideva's, if it's not explicit in the text, it's implied, but when we dedicate, it it should be a practice of loving kindness and compassion. And the dedication gives it a thrust, or it gives it a form. When we dedicate, similarly as when we do the 7-branch prayer, which of course then also ends with the dedication, but it's taught that a key point of dedicating is to always feel confident in the presence of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as, in this case, witnesses to our dedication. Witnesses, and at the conclusion of our dedication, then we should feel that the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas are rejoicing, or are as witnesses, they are affirming and saying things like we read at the end of the sutras when one of the Buddhas or Bodhisattvas gives a very good discourse. He says, may it be so, exactly that, yes, exactly that, let it be that, let it be. That feeling, we should also feel confident in that. So then, imagining that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas appear in front of us, and here the first verse says, by all the virtue I have now amassed, by composition of this book, which speaks of entry to the Bodhisattva way, may every being tread the path to Buddhahood. So that kind of encapsulates or introduces the whole practice of dedication. So here the one who dedicates is Shantideva. Originally, Shantideva made his dedication. And he made his dedication by all the virtue I have now amassed. We could say when we dedicate all the virtue of the past, all the virtue of the present, and all the virtue of the future. All the virtue of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 3 times, all the virtue of all arhats, all pratyeka Buddhas, all good practitioners, all good-hearted individuals, all the virtue of any virtue that any being has gathered in the past, is gathering in the present, or will gather in the future, then we dedicate that. That's how Shantideva dedicated. And so now, presently, we're the ones who are dedicating. So our dedication, we could even think, well, Shantideva already dedicated my virtue of studying this text. He dedicated all virtue of the future, which includes all those who are studying the Bodhisattva path. I dedicate all future people who are studying the Bodhisattva path. So our virtue has already been dedicated by Shantideva, but now we're dedicating it, and our dedication, such as it is, merges with Shantideva's dedication, merges with all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, all the great masters of awareness of the 3 times. We dedicate Shantideva's virtue. We dedicate our own virtue. We dedicate all virtue of sentient beings. We dedicate all those who come in the future, all their virtue. So it's quite extraordinary uh, to bend, to bend our mind in that way. Yeah, mind bending, and that all of that virtue, that whole vast aggregation of virtue, is represented by the virtue that you have in mind, specifically the virtue of uh, excitedly logging on to hear about the Bodhisattva path and things like that. So if you do a practice, you do some meditation of some kind, or you set some animal free, or you light some candle or stick of incense, or you notice that you had uh, that something occurred and you came out with a feeling of a great love and compassion. And then it passes. And then you dedicate the virtue of that as a representation, or as uh, a representative, an example, but of all that virtue of the three times of all beings. So that's who's dedicating, the agent, the dedicator. And then, of course, then we dedicate it within the purity of the sphere of the dedicator. And then what's dedicated is the virtue, as we mentioned. So this composition of this book, which is entry to the Bodhisattva way, also uh, not only entry into the Bodhisattva way, but the all the giving rise to the intention to generate bodhicitta is dedicated. Giving rise to bodhicitta is dedicated. Protecting bodhicitta from declining is dedicated. Uh, all the practices of the six perfections are dedicated. And we're dedicated to here, may every being tread the path to Buddhahood. So again, linking dedication with an aspiration, uh, uh, and with as a practice of loving kindness and compassion, we dedicate this merit so that all beings attain enlightenment. That should be an expression of our loving kindness. We can wish lots of good things happen to people, but if people enter into the path of awakening and attain that awakening, then that is the great aspiration. That's the immeasurable loving kindness. Immeasurable love is the aspiration to that all beings uh, find enlightenment. Mm-hmm. Of course, when we dedicate virtue to the attainment of enlightenment, we are talking about dedicating virtue to the result. And when we dedicate virtue to the practice of the paramitas and so forth, then we're dedicating it to the cause of enlightenment. So it comes to the same, it still comes to the same thing. Uh, when we dedicate there's what's called the four links, the linking principle. And one is to dedicate with aspiration, as we mentioned. And that has to do with the wish and the verbal expression of may all beings be happy. May all beings adopt bodhisattva conduct. It's that aspiration. And then the second linkage is called longing. Should link, your dedication should link with longing. And longing means it's almost like longing. It's an emotional piece. It's how wonderful it would be if that were the case. How wonderful if it would be if all beings were happy. How wonderful it would be if all beings didn't quarrel. This is called dedicating with longing. And the third linking principle is resolution or commitment. And that takes the form of a resolve in your heart and your bones that I will bring them to happiness. I will bring them to the path of awakening. That's your dedication linked with commitment. And then the fourth linking principle is prayer. Then you invoke and pray to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, to the three jewels, to bless me that I accomplish this task. Okay. So when you dedicate or and link that dedication with aspiration, with longing, with a resolution, with a resolve, with a commitment, aspiration, longing, commitment, and prayer, then you can feel that all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are supporting you and saying, may that come to be. Yes, let it happen. Let it be. May it be like that. And so the root of all of this, and of course, Palcha Rinpoche was always teaching the importance of loving kindness, the wish for others' happiness temporarily, and the wish for others' happiness ultimately in the liberation from suffering and ultimate Buddhahood. It's this loving kindness, to cultivate that loving kindness as you dedicate merit, as you dedicate virtue. That gives rise to compassion. And compassion gives rise to bodhicitta. This is the way Palcha Rinpoche taught. Okay. Bodhicitta meaning love and compassion, or loving kindness giving rise to compassion, compassion giving rise to bodhicitta, meaning relative bodhicitta and ultimate absolute bodhicitta. Okay, so here then these are the 3 points. No, 2. Then of course the object of our dedication. So the agent is the dedicating. And then the virtue is what is dedicated, that which is to be dedicated. And then the recipient, the object of our dedication is all sentient beings, are all sentient beings. May all beings attain Buddhahood. May all beings turn towards conduct that leads to enlightenment. So that is the object of our dedication, the recipient. And so to learn all this and then to apply it free of the 3 spheres, that's what is carried out in a way, in a manner of free of the stains of clinging to virtue, to self as the agent, and to clinging to beings as the object, free of those clingings, with some recognition or appreciation of the basic fundamental Buddhist truth of non-self. Okay. So that's the verse 1. The beings everywhere who suffer torment in their minds and bodies have, by virtue of my merit, joy and happiness in boundless measure. As long as they may linger in samsara, may their joy be undiminished. May they taste of unsurpassed beatitude in constant and unbroken continuity. So now the object, the object of the recipient of our dedication, those to whom we are dedicating merit, is specifically beings who are suffering. So we should reflect again on suffering, the 3 kinds of suffering: the suffering of pain, what we normally associate as pain or suffering, that kind of suffering. And this first 4 lines relate to dedicating your virtue, to those who are experiencing the suffering, the suffering of pain. And so again, we need to understand where suffering comes from and develop that confidence in our understanding of suffering as having a cause. And that cause is negative actions. That is to say, actions that are motivated by hatred, anger, irritation, grumpiness, all of the degrees, the hundreds of degrees of aversion, and motivated by desire and all the different multiple degrees of desire, and ignorance, stupidity, bewilderment, can't figure out what to do, kind of mind that still acts even though not knowing what to do, jealousy, pride, envy, mental doubt, sort of all these uh, uh, attitudes we have, all these moods or attitudes motivate our speech, motivate our action, and they also motivate thought forms, visions, and thought forms, sentences that we repeat. And this is the root of suffering. And suffering is, as we know in the teachings on karma, suffering is the experience of the actor. The results of actions only ripen to those who cause it. And it's inevitable. It's ineluctable. That is to say, there's no way that it can be on its own, in its own, uh, according to its own sort of physics. There's nothing that will keep it from happening. Like say, just like a bird in the sun, when a bird takes off, its shadow seems to disappear, but it's still there and becomes obvious when the bird gets closer to the ground. There's no other agent that is involved. And when suffering arises, there's no other outside agent that causes that to occur. It's all the result of causes and conditions, actions. So and here when we're dedicating, we should also reinforce our understanding of interdependence, how everything is interdependently connected, and that interdependence is becomes the coincidence of causes and conditions, which give rise to experiences that are felt by those who have a mind. And if they have a body, then it's felt by the mind and the body. And whatever else they may have, then it's felt by that mind and that object that mind is associated with, which we'll get to a little later. So may beings everywhere who suffer the results of their negative actions, we could say, and experience that as in their minds and bodies, like depression in their minds, or fear, or insanity, or in their bodies as disease, or various forms of injury. So may they, their minds and bodies, have, by virtue of my merit, that is to say, through here now, pay attention here, this have, now this is your compassion, saying, may they be free, which is compassion. Your compassion is, may they be free of that, of the torment of their suffering, physical and mental suffering, by my merit. And by my merit of what? My merit of practicing bodhicitta, my merit of studying and reflecting and implementing, practicing what I've studied and reflected on and gained confidence in. All that merit I dedicate, may they be free. So your compassion towards that pain of suffering is expressed. That has to do with the, yeah, and then joy and happiness, have by virtue of my merit, joy and happiness in boundless measure. So perfect happiness. And this is then you're bringing forth that aspiration should have that loving kindness. May all beings who are suffering torment in their minds and bodies have joy and happiness. May they possess love in all its perfection, and may they experience themselves physically and mentally well. May their experience be one of well-being. Okay, so here you're. Then the third verse has to do with the suffering of change. Change is a suffering that occurs when you're happy, you're not suffering, and then that happiness changes to suffering, that kind of suffering. When we're happy, again, then we should reflect and enhance our confidence in causation and karma by reflecting on the suffering of change as happiness is the result of goodness, of wholesome, of virtuous, caring, loving actions, generous actions, open-hearted actions, disciplined actions that have a good motivation, not just kind of pro forma virtue, but they're motivated by love and compassion, by empathy, by sympathy, by pity, by patience, by generosity, and so forth. And the result is happiness. When certain conditions come together, then that root of virtuous actions motivated by virtue matures, expresses itself as happiness, one or another form of happiness. Even the virtue, the karma of when you get up in the morning and you put your feet down on the floor and you push yourself up, that's because of that's your virtue, enables you to do that. So when that virtue, when the karma, let's say when that virtuous karma comes to an end, it reaches its sort of what do you call it, expiration date, its pull date, and that pull date, that expiration date for a virtuous action is commensurate with, or is associated, commensurate with the intensity of the act. And the intensity of the act, of course, there's many factors involved. Your motivation, the actual thing itself, the act itself, and the recipient. All these things interdependently create the conditions whereby that happiness is brought forth for a limited amount of time. And this is having to do with we're always here. We're talking about undedicated or contaminated karma, good karma that's not dedicated, and negative karma that is not purified. So as long as they may linger in samsara, may their joy be undiminished, having to do with those who are happy for the time being. As long as they may linger in samsara. I don't know about lingering in samsara, but for the time being, those that are happy, may their joy be undiminished. This is how you practice loving kindness, with that motivation in your dedication. As long as, all those who are happy temporarily for the time being, may that happiness be undiminished, and may it increase. And when we dedicate with a view to liberate beings from the suffering of change, may they be liberated from the suffering of change, then that's bringing forth your compassion. Because happiness, even though we wish it to last a long time, it's impermanent. And the default is another form of suffering, which is the suffering of change, suffering of changing, and having to experience some other karmic fruition. So we dedicate with a view to liberate beings from the suffering of change, as with compassion, and may they never lose their happiness of mind and their good fortune, as we dedicate with that as a love. May they taste of unsurpassed beatitude and constant and unbroken continuity. So this here is having to do, the object of our dedication are all those sentient beings who are suffering what's called all-pervasive suffering, this third kind of suffering, what's also called imminent suffering, or suffering in the making. And that suffering is basically experiencing ourselves as the physical and mental aggregates, the skandhas. As long as we're clinging to the skandhas and applying and assuming and mistaking that for a self, then we experience this underlying discontent, or this underlying suffering that's suffering in the making. It's like I don't know if this is a good example. It's like a car that's not tuned up properly. The engine it's just doing its thing, and it's not doing anything noticeable. It's just perking along, but it's creating a whole layer of pollution behind it through the exhaust, right? And so the same is our clinging to our skandhas and all these parts that we assume have a kind of a unifying, that they're all unified as me. I am the sum of all these parts. That notion that there's an I that's the sum of parts. It's the same like that engine, and that sends out from that. It's imminent suffering comes from that, and so we dedicate that with a view to free beings from this kind of suffering through compassion, with compassionate dedication to free all beings from this all-pervasive compassion. This is the compassion of the one levels of the bodhisattvas. Their compassion is towards that suffering. And so then praying and dedicating with the view that they be freed from that all-pervasive suffering, and that they attain the vast, unceasing bliss of enlightenment out of loving kindness. So throughout the throughout the spheres and reaches of the world, in hellish states, as many as there are, may beings who abide there taste the bliss and peace of Sukhavati. I don't know. I think. Well, we'll just. I'll just go over this. Here we're. He's directing our dedication towards. Previously, it was to all beings who are experiencing these three forms of suffering. Now he's turning his attention, or the teaching is directed towards the object of our virtuous dedication is towards those who are in the various realms of samsara. And he's starting, unfortunately, he's starting with the hell realms, which is a tough, it gets tough going here, but so in hellish states refers to the fruition. Again, this is all the fruition of unenlightened mind and its actions, and it experiences itself in an environment, and it experiences itself as a certain kind of being with a certain form, just like we experience our physical form when we're awake, and at nighttime we live in a dream, and we also incarnate or embody. We have this, or that habit of embodying carries into our dreams, and we dream we have a body, even though it's just a mental fabrication, but we still act as if it were materially substantial and vulnerable to injury and gravity and centrifugal force and things like that, as if it wasn't just kind of what we say non-existent. It's just a mental fabrication. So we have this. Our mind has that habit of always feeling embodied, and why we feel that way is, again, this expression we use, because of beginning with samsara. It's a total habit, and that habit is broken. We recover from that habit when we become liberated from, when our mind becomes liberated from samsara, that the spheres and reaches of the world and hellish states. So here, when they're talking about hellish states, specifically has to do with the fruition of anger, hatred, and again, all of the actions that are driven by anger and hatred and aggression, aversion. And the results of those, again, interdependently with the circumstances of the act, which is the doer, the act, and the recipient again, our experience is one of the mind's experiences. The mind's experience is one of either cold or hot, heat or cold, in various degrees, again, interdependent with the whole original circumstances of the cause. So may those beings who abide there, again, by the strength of my virtue, I'm dedicating, may all those beings who abide there taste the bliss and peace of Sukhavati. So here, I should look that up. Here Shantideva is picking on the pure realm of Sukhavati. Okay, yeah. Which, I don't know, it seems to be I don't know if that's this era of this kalpa or this fortunate eon or what, but Sukhavati seems to be kind of the go-to destination for certain Mahayana practitioners and Vajrayana practitioners. The field, the enlightened field of the Buddha Amitabha, the perfection or the how do you say, the discerning timeless awareness, or the wisdom of discernment. So I say that I'm not being disrespectful, but I mean when we started our practice here, we're trying we begin by invoking the Buddhism and Buddhism Bodhisattvas in their pure realms, each one. And as it says, there's a Buddhas in pure realms surrounded by their entourages on every atom in the megaverse. So that's a lot of pure realms. And somehow, through karma and conditions and Amitabha's blessings, then we're very we have a kind of a deep relationship. And here even Shantideva is highlighting that here in his dedication. So by the strength of my virtue, may all those beings who are experiencing too hot and too cold, may they experience the outer environment, which is completely pure. Basically, in a pure realm, the temperature is whatever you want. It's not too hot, it's not too cold. It's just, the air is very fresh and soft, and everything about the air and the temperature and the climate of it is perfect to your mind. And the ground is easy. It's easy going, and so forth. I think he's going to go on about that different things. So I'll just leave it at this here. That we're praying with our love and compassion that May beings not experience hot and cold. May they be freed from that out of our compassion by dedicating. I dedicate this merit that they be freed from that horror of uh, hot and cold. And may they rather experience their environment as the pure realm of Sukhavati, of the Dewachen, the great bliss, and come into the presence of Amitabha. May the, what is it, the Yama, the Lord of Death, the personification of death, is called Yama. So may they not experience the ruthless, judgmental, cold justice, karmic justice of Yama, but may they experience the love and compassion of Amitabha and all of the henchmen who are inflicting all this suffering on top of all the within that environment of heat and cold, and all the various forms of karmic fruition that are taking the form of different painful experiences. May all those that are like hallucinations that we are experiencing pain from, may they all appear as the bodhisattvas, like Manjushri and Chenrezig and Vajrapani and so on and so forth, all the major and bodhisattvas. And may all the hell beings that are suffering with me here, may they all be experienced as happy and joyful practitioners of virtue, and may they all assume the view of the great Mahayana path and the practice of Mahayana. May they become practitioners of a Mahayana. So like that. So that's our aspiration with love and compassion there. So I think that's way a lot tonight, and we'll take it up again next time. This chapter has 57 verses in it. And so now, with that in mind, see if you can throw make your mindfulness kind of reach into the all of these teachings and come out with virtue of that, and then again apply whatever elements of that teaching on how to dedicate, apply it to this listening to the teachings, and then in a minute we'll recite the dedication. So be aware of the dedicator, what is to be dedicated, the virtue, and the vast expanse of the aggregate of sentient beings. And with love and compassion, recite all the virtue of this practice and all that is gathered throughout the 3 times, I dedicate to all beings without exception, so that they may attain Buddhahood. Following and emulating the omniscient and courageous Manjushri, and likewise Samantabhadra, I completely dedicate all virtue. Since dedicating merit is praised as supreme by victorious ones of the 3 times, I completely dedicate these roots of virtue for the sake of practicing excellent conduct. May the teachings of Lord Buddha, the only source of benefit and happiness, long remain in this world. May the lives of those who uphold these teachings be as stable as a victory banner. Supreme Bodhicitta is so very precious. Where it has not yet arisen, may it arise. Where it has arisen, may it not decline, but evermore grow and flourish. Okay, then take care, be well, get a good night.